Chapter 15, Jovia Sensei's Seminar Part 1. Resumes. When Sana and the others returned to the conference hall, the students were still in the same mood as before. Sana sat in his assigned seat, but since the instructor hadn't arrived yet, no one tried to come within a certain distance of him. You've completely scared me. Isn't that a bit strange? It's true that I tried to imitate Sito-sama, but it was just a random thought. No matter how I think about it, I don't think I could replicate Sito-sama's act. The magical system transformed Sana's consciousness into magic and emitted it as intimidation. Huh? What we experience due to the bias of Sana's probability is not something an ordinary person could endure. This time, you just emitted it, but if you aimed it at someone, it could easily become an instant death spell. In fact, that's what happened to Hato, who was closest to you. Instant death? Seriously? Next time you use it, I'll control it. Nayuta didn't say it, but Hato's physical strengthening was at a surprisingly high level. Also, perhaps because he was used to fighting, he had a decent resistance to intimidation. If he hadn't, the situation would have been much worse. The girl who had been sitting next to Hato, who had been harassed by him, called out. She was also one of the people who had been avoiding Sana, but perhaps the intimidation effect had worn off as she slowly began to approach Sana. Sorry for getting you involved. I'm Liren. Liren bowed her head apologetically. The others still kept their distance, so perhaps her will was strong, or perhaps her guilt overcame her fear. I'm Sana. It's not that I dragged myself into this, I just stuck my nose into it without permission. Seeing as I was in trouble, right? In fact, my seat was blocked as well. More importantly, the outcome of the duel seems to be unclear, so you'd better be careful, Liren. I'm sure the staff will be on the lookout, and will make the person who started the duel take responsibility. I think it'll probably be okay. He's a slave after all. Liren, seemingly no longer afraid of Sana, sat down next to him. A slave? As you may have noticed, Hato and I are from the same hometown. He's been causing trouble ever since he was little, and he was 7 days into a magic essence cold, so he got carried away and was completely out of control. Oh, 7 days. That's precious. Since magic colds usually last for 2 or 3 days, Hato can be said to be quite strong. His physical strengthening was at a high level, and he seemed used to fighting, so I can imagine what it might be. However, from what Jovia said, he seems to be the type who would drag everyone around him down and destroy himself. Yes, that's right. Because of that personality, he didn't like to be taught by someone, and he could hardly use any magic other than physical strengthening. But he has a lot of magical power, so the stamina of strengthening is amazing, with an opponent in an almost infinite berserker state, unless you could subdue them in a short time with a significant difference in skill or numbers. There was no way to do anything. If things went wrong, you could end up needing the army. So he put all his magical power into that. Well, that's not a bad thing. Considering his fighting ability, if he learned how to use weapons and gained experience, he could be a great frontline member of a party. However, if Jovia's impression was correct, he was a party crasher. And he was not the type to last long. In the end, he got carried away and entered the magic tree forest with his entourage, which caused a small stampede and caused great damage to the village. Normally, if the purpose was hunting, one would carefully dispatch each monster one by one, but in Hato's case, he wanted to show off his skills, so he charged in without thinking and slaughtered weak monsters at random, without doing a proper job of disposing of them, causing the other monsters to go berserk with the scent of their blood. I see. So he's a debt slave for compensation. We're kind of similar in a way. Eh? No, it's not that serious. The village suffered damage and many villagers lost the foundation of their livelihoods, so the village received a reasonable amount of compensation in exchange for allowing them to relocate to this city as labor. Of course, there were benefits for the villagers who lost their jobs. The city was convenient, safe, and there were plenty of jobs. Oh, that reminds me, I heard that they were recruiting immigrants to expand the city. But I didn't realize he'd been sold here too. So he invited you to form a party? I can use magic to a certain extent, and you can take on higher paying requests in a party rather than solo. Plus, higher paying requests give more contribution points towards freeing slaves. I see. But the problem lies in forcing it on people. Whatever anyone may say, he was just trying to turn them into minions that were convenient for him. The root cause was the same as when he and his entourage caused the stampede. Even so, it seems like he has a lot of freedom. If you call him a debt slave, if you're in debt, then you're in a similar situation, right? Well, I see. So he's just confined to the city, but he still has some freedom of movement. Apparently, they decided that with that power, he could earn more money as a hunting adventurer. Of course, that's only if he doesn't cause any trouble. The staff told me that from now on, he will be restricted in his movements by a restraint ring, and if he does anything again, he will be taken to the military. If you're on probation, you get your license suspended immediately. I see. Hey guys. Have you calmed down a bit? At that moment, Jovia came in, looking rather pleased. She looked around at Sena and the people around him and nodded. Before she knew it, the people who had been keeping their distance from Sena were now sitting in their designated seats, and the atmosphere around them seemed quite calm. Very well. Now, everyone, let's continue the lesson. After making sure that the students' attention was directed towards her, Jovia cleared her throat lightly, put her hands on the desk, and leaned forward. Everyone, you are truly fortunate. You could even call it a stroke of luck. After all, you're in this safe place and have had this rare experience. First, let's thank Hato, who made this valuable experience possible. Jovia spoke loudly, as if she was a dictator giving a speech. She was already in high spirits. That Hato-kun gave it his all, haha. He has literally given it all away and is currently holed up in seclusion. Please look forward to his future exploits. After that, Jovia couldn't bear it and burst out laughing. That's disgusting. That was the opinion of everyone there. Even if Hato was a bit of a troublemaker, it was still a pity. Ha ha ha. Gay ha 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 ha. Kaya ha ha ha. Ah, that's weird. She must have found it really funny, as she banged the table and laughed through the tears. Then the referee, the rough-and-tumble staff member, came storming up to Jovia and punched her in the stomach without holding back. Gah! Jovia collapsed in agony behind the desk and disappeared, while the staff member turned around and returned to his original position. That's pretty merciless. That must be the usual thing. The other students, having become somewhat accustomed to Jovia as a person, also looked on with blank expressions. Sena-san, I'm starting to feel a bit sorry for Hato. Lauren muttered. Of course I won't be forming a party. Women are really strong in situations like this. I look forward to seeing Hato's future success. Ha ha ha. Anyway, I digress. No, sorry everyone. Jovia stood up and smiled as if nothing had happened. The staff member who had hit Jovia glared at her, but it didn't seem to bother her. It was like hitting a nail in the face with a nail. By this time, all the students seemed to have fully understood what kind of person Jovia was. Ahem. Now then, when I said it was good fortune, I was referring to the feeling you all experienced in the arena. Suddenly, a murmur arose among the students and their attention turned to Sena. Yes, that feeling. In fact, it's similar to the aura emanating from high-ranking monsters that you encounter in the depths of the magic forest. You could call it the intimidating feeling you get when you confront it. In other words, you're lucky to have had such a rare experience in this safe place, so be grateful to that insane young man Sena and to Hato for dragging him into a duel. You said I was extremely unreasonable. Even if it's unreasonable, there's a big difference between force majeure and intentional acts, right? Now, as you know, from now on, your main area of activity will be the Sea of Magic Trees. It is a place where many useful resources lie dormant, but at the same time, it is also a den of monsters that are an obstacle to harvesting. Of course, since monsters are also a resource, we need to know about the monsters that are the biggest obstacle. And the goblins are the species you will encounter most often there. How much do you all know about them? Jovia turned her attention to the cocky-looking students. Goblins are the lowest of the low, aren't they? They're not so different from piddos, are they? I took down one when I was 12 that had entered the village. Just as Jovia had expected, the young men who were similar to Hato and boasted of their strength began to voice their opinions. When they declared their intention to subjugate the enemy, a small murmur arose from the others. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, young men, for your exemplary answers. Monsters are ranked from top to bottom as heavenly, water, earth, and pitto. Each type is divided into 10 levels, from level 1 to level 10, and goblins are actually level 1 of heavenly type. You're kidding, right? So, am I awesome? The students responded in various ways, mostly surprise and disbelief. Some were knowledgeable but silent. The level of knowledge among the students varied. Too bad. I think the goblins that you killed were around level 2 earth types. Huh? That's completely different from what you said earlier. That's a nice template reaction. I'm not making fun of you or anything, you know? A lot of people make the same mistake as you, young man, and believe that goblins are just small fry among monsters. What do you mean by mistaken? A monster's rank is determined by a number of factors. The terrain it lives in, its numbers, the distance to its habitat, the types of other monsters living there, the density, and so on. For example, the difficulty of defeating the same monster will be different in grasslands and swamps. If it's a flying monster that flies through the sky and makes its nest on a high cliff or in a tree, it can be out of reach even if the monster itself isn't that strong, right? Oh, as Jovia explained, the angry young man began to realize what she meant, as did the others who had questions. Goblins really do spawn anywhere. There are even some that live in water, and there have been records of individuals that flatten their bodies and glide 200 meters from tree to tree. I think that soon we might even find some that can fly in the sky on their own. Their habitats range from the city, like that young man who went on a hunting expedition earlier, to the depths of the sea of magic trees. They spawn anywhere. They're shameless and move only with their lower bodies. Jovia spoke as if she had some kind of personal grudge against goblins. Her dislike for them was obvious. They were like cockroaches. The word goblin was also somewhat similar to cockroach. Even just from seeing Sana when you were lost, it seemed like there was a huge variety not just in traits, but in coat color and texture. It's really surprising how different they are in the wild, where they haven't been bred. There are also many strange, bizarre mutations, and they adapt to all kinds of environments, ranging in strength from scrawny to large and muscular. Their behavior patterns are also diverse, ranging from timid to aggressive, and there are even perverted species that attack females of other species, as well as a species that gets excited just by peeping at mating. There are so many bizarre examples that it's impossible to list them all. Every year, new reports of unbelievable sightings emerge. From stray individuals wandering into urban areas to large-scale stampedes, and even examples of them swarming like ants in deep caves. It's enough to make you wonder if these creatures have been genetically modified by an evil organization or a malevolent deity. But I hear they're not that smart? Perhaps relaxed by Jovia's humorous tone, a female participant asked. Yes, that's a good question. Scholars put the intelligence of goblins at about the level of a 3 to 5-year-old. Jovia's words elicited laughter from the students. But it's dangerous to accept that at face value, and it's wrong. Jovia suddenly looked around at the students with a serious expression. Think about it carefully. Change your perspective. It's a fact that they live in the sea of magic trees and have multiplied a lot. It's true that they don't have the intelligence to create a culture as diverse as humans, but if they specialize in surviving the harsh struggle for survival that is the sea of magic trees, then you could say they have more wisdom and abilities than humans. In fact, goblins are the ones that have caused the most damage to ordinary people so far. They also cause a surprising amount of damage to hunting adventurers. Jovia looked around at the students. Some of them didn't seem to accept it, but no one dared to voice an objection, perhaps because they couldn't think of any logical reason to argue. What's more, what makes them so troublesome is that out of all the monsters, they have the most curiosity. Like the story of the young man we just heard about, I don't often hear of monsters coming out of the sea of magic trees on their own, unless there's something like a stampede. They sometimes wander around the border between the sea of magic trees on their own, but I've never heard of one coming out to the pitto fields. Has anyone seen one? No one answered Jovia's question, but many shook their heads. That curiosity leads goblins to use weapons, and sometimes even magic. Individuals that are too unusual or dangerous are prioritized for extermination, so you don't hear about them very often. However, when large groups gather in favorable conditions with few other natural predators, there are cases when an individual will become a king, so you can't let your guard down. Some kings have abilities similar to those of the ancients. You've probably heard of the ancients, right? Ancient species, right? I hear they have special powers. That's a fairy tale, isn't it? Ancient species often lived in the depths of the sea of magic trees. This was only natural, as gates tended to appear in places with high concentrations of magical energy, but actual sightings were rare and there was little accurate information available. They do exist on other planets. There have been cases of goblins being discovered with intelligence on par with that of humans. Seriously? Seriously. When it comes to the king class that inhabits the abyss, some individuals have high intelligence and can use advanced magic. When the pack led by such an individual continues to exist and expands stably, the techniques possessed by the king are passed down. When a highly intelligent individual appears, a young king candidate gains advanced abilities at an early stage and becomes independent, forming a new pack, which then grows larger again, setting off a nightmarish chain reaction. There have been cases where they have taken over a continent. Troubling, isn't it? What happened in that case? Apparently, the people on the ground couldn't do anything about it, so the people in the sky burned the herd's habitat. The sky people were, of course, those who live in space. Sky people. Unlike the people here, there are some decent and serious ones out there. Anyway, getting back to the point, even if we limit ourselves to the goblin species, it's only natural that the difficulty of defeating them varies widely. It's dangerous to make assumptions, even with monsters. There's a saying that goes, if you know the monster and know yourself, you won't be in danger in 100 battles. This means that if you know the monster, its environment, and all the other conditions, and are fully prepared and equipped to face them, you can win any battle. I wonder if Jovia brought that phrase with her? There's a high possibility. If that's the case, then maybe she's not just spreading weird sayings? I think 99% of the time it's not stupid. Incidentally, Nayuta's prediction was correct. Sensible proverbs were common in every world, so if you tried to fill in the gaps, it could end up with something vulgar. Through Pito hunting, you have gained experience as a hunter-adventurer. From now on, the field and the target of extermination will change. In order to meet your new goal, you must gather information about that target. Here in the guild, we have various records about monsters and the sea of magic trees collected by hunter-adventurers. The museum in town also has a greater variety of materials than the guild. And we have many experienced hunter-adventurers, both retired and active, working as staff members. We also hold regular training sessions, so make the most of them to gather information. To begin with, information cannot be obtained without knowledge. The main method nowadays is the internet, but even that is impossible to search for unless you have a certain level of knowledge about the information you need. The internet is a classic example of a broad but shallow search, and you cannot obtain detailed, in-depth information. It certainly has an excellent table of contents, but to go beyond that you need to go to specialist books, consult with experts, or see and hear things for yourself. Either way, you need to know the methods themselves, that is, where to go and how to obtain information. On top of that, it's important to accumulate your own experience. Don't just listen, see with your own eyes, observe and try it out. Listen, see, move your body and understand from multiple angles. Combine these elements and knowledge to think for yourself and use your ingenuity to solve problems. Then train your body and mind to be able to put those ideas into practice. Repeat this entire process over and over again. Remember that doing so is the key to protecting your life and achieving your goals. After saying that, Jovia observed the students intently. Some were listening sincerely, but many looked somewhat annoyed. I know I said that at the beginning, but you don't really feel it that much, do you? I'm sure some of you are thinking, what is she talking about? The place that is filled with old hag. Stop hitting the nail on the head. I understand, I used to think the same way too. It's impossible for inexperienced people like you to really understand it. Tisk. A few Heidokuin-type students reacted to that statement by clicking their tongues. Those who had been told things by adults seemed to feel it annoying. Of course, Jovia was also provoking them to do so. Everyone here was bullied in the arena, right? If you're confident that you won't end up like Heido-kun, who got Seinachi's attention, how about you go and duel that insane guy now? Jovia provoked them, but everyone remained silent. No one wanted to be the target of that abnormality. That was how intense the experience was. Oh, dear, you're so convenient to her. Well, it's nothing new, so it's fine. But I'll cooperate if it helps them gain experience in avoiding danger. Kukukuku, I wouldn't have ended up like that. But that's the result of accumulated training and experience. If I was your age, I'd probably have ended up similar to Heido-kun. What do you think? No comment. If he did something like that, Jovia would probably demand compensation and demand that he take responsibility and marry her. Either way, she wouldn't give up without a fight. You will be receiving various lessons from now on, but just remember this. Words are very ambiguous. What the other person is saying will never convey exactly the same meaning. Teaching is not as omnipotent as you think, and it is not magic that can solve all problems. And then, in the end, you end up making excuses like, I can't do it, I don't understand, or the teaching method was bad. That's a painful story to hear. But since it's advice from someone who can do it, it's correct for that person. If you can't do it, it's because you're immature and something is missing, or you have the knowledge in your head, but it's not connected to real-life events, so you can't draw out that knowledge. But the person teaching you isn't omnipotent, and they're not gods either. They don't know what you're lacking or where you're lacking. The magic system is a good example. There are quite a few differences between how Seina thinks and the words he uses to imagine things. So Niuda is making up for it. This is why Seina was growing faster than Jovia, who was also able to communicate with the magic system. People are born and raised differently, and they all have different knowledge, experiences, sensitivities, physiques, and genders. Even if you form a party, it's not like you can work together right away, right? The same goes for both the teacher and the student. It's something that can only be bridged over time. The sense of time when you are young is different from that of adults. Children cannot wait as long as adults can. They tend to seek immediate results and quick and easy solutions, but in reality, such things do not exist. That is why people with high skills are highly valued for their efforts and results. But ultimately, you have to realize and understand it yourself. You have to make the effort to fill in the missing parts, connect memories, and give them meaning. If you continue as a hunter-adventurer, for example, when you reach the depths of the sea of magic trees and face a problem, there may be a situation where no one has the knowledge or there is no one around you to rely on. At that time, when you have to solve the problem on your own, it is necessary to have mastered the method and procedure for solving the problem itself. Jovia's tone was more serious than ever. Of course, it's not easy. Constant effort and determination. You need determination, determination, determination. When results don't seem to come easily, you start to waver and feel like giving up. When you feel jealous and want to give up, you have to encourage yourself and move forward. Life has its ups and downs. That's a phrase I've heard somewhere before. Well, that's actually surprisingly true. After the rain, there is a rainbow. Walk your own path. If you don't want to cry when younger and younger people catch up and surpass you in skills and achievements, you have no choice but to walk. At this point, questions appeared on the faces of the students. Well, the source of the material was an entertainment program from a planet thousands of light years away, so it was only natural that they wouldn't understand what Jovia was saying. That's how it goes. I know you're all frustrated, but in the end, it comes down to mentality. A weak heart can easily turn high skills into lame shit. Wow! This has turned into a morality argument. Mental control is an essential skill if you want to improve. To put it in Jovia's words, if you give up, the game is over. I've seen so many people with great skills and talent who were weak-hearted and ended up becoming lazy or self-destructing. Don't let that happen to you. At that moment, Jovia suddenly raised her hand. A high-pitched sound rang out, and the top of the large, thick stone table that served as the teacher's desk was ripped into pieces. It was a brilliant cut, and it happened so quickly that even Seina could just barely comprehend what had happened. Well, if you can't perform a trick like this, you won't be able to reach the depths of the sea of magic trees. Cheer up, young people. Jovia, you have to pay for that. The passionate speech ended with cold words from the staff member. What? But this is a set of guideposts and education for young people, together with the insane one you just mentioned, you know? So, it's an expense. She was a woman with comedy etched in her soul. Jovia had completely forgotten, but the desktops in this conference room were made of very high-quality materials and were quite expensive. Of course, various fines for violations were also added on top of that. For Jovia, who had a lot of income but was also wasteful and was always short of cash, it was a pretty painful amount. You suddenly showed up early in the morning, demanded to be allowed to participate without receiving any speaking fee, and then forced yourself to participate, didn't you? Huh? Well, I guess so. So you're not an officially requested instructor. I told you. Yes, I did. If you don't have the money, I'll have the guild pay for it. Oh, magistrate. I'll pay. I'll even sell my blood to make the money, so if possible, please keep this a secret. Only from my daughter. Jovia desperately clung to the staff member. When the guild needed to pay for something, a notification was sent to their home, and it's Raska who would receive it. Who's the magistrate? It's you. I don't want to cause her any trouble, so I'll keep this a secret, but you'd better clean up and pay for it. Hee. She suddenly knelt down and stored the pieces of the table in spirit thread storage. Well then, everyone, this marks the end of my training. We're going to move on to the practical exam, so please follow that old man's instructions. Jovia waved to the dumbfounded students with a serious look on her face and then fled the room. You guys probably have a lot to say, but you are still magicians who hold the highest rank of mage. What? To the students' surprise, the staff member who was called an old man grimaced. But as you all have probably noticed, she is also known as a talented pervert, and her behavior is as strange as you'd expect. That's true. It's true, but it's also true that she has solid skills. What she said earlier was something I would have said if I had been the lecturer, so there's no doubt that it's true. Well, you probably can't really feel it now, but as we go forward, you'll understand little by little. Even the students who had doubts about Jovia seemed to be taking the words of the physically strong staff member, who was clearly a veteran. That's right. I'll give you one more word of advice. The Sea of Magic Trees is a mountain of treasure, but it's also full of dangers. No matter how careful you are, you can get lost. Of course, the guild will send out rescue missions, but the reality is that we are rarely able to help. It's not uncommon for the body to not even be found. Whether you are rescued or return on your own, it is the skills you have acquired that will increase your chances of survival. In the end, it is most reliable to protect yourself. That's why you should keep in mind what that pervert said earlier. I wish he had been my teacher. Even if Jovia was saying the right thing, it always sounded like a lie. The receiver doesn't take it seriously enough. But it was definitely Sena's fault that Jovia forced her way in, right? Huh. I've done bad things to everyone. This too was rolled into Sena's bad luck. Next is the practical exam, but you will be split into groups of 10 and moved around.